The coming month, June of 2025, is pregnant with explosive potential. The heavyweight planet Saturn has moved into the war sign of Aries, and following an alleged assassination attempt on Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Russians responded with a massive drone barrage on the Ukrainian capital of Kiev. The stakes and pressure have dramatically risen in the Ukraine war. But what's coming next? Well, after a year in Gemini, Jupiter, the planet of faith, wealth, and empire, is moving into Cancer. Jupiter is strong in this sign, and at an individual level, this could bring a year of growth, optimism, and good fortune in certain parts of our lives. But Jupiter is also the planet of empire, and its presence in Cancer can bring imperial overreach, a focus on homeland security, and a you're with us or against us mentality. We're also reaching the start of a stretch of the year in which we could expect big financial problems to surface in the global economy. And there's some challenging astrology appearing in the middle of the month, which might affect President Trump. Could he be in danger once again? In this video, we'll go through all of June's major shifts in a concise lowdown for you and for the wider world. So, welcome to another journey into the past to understand the present and the future. If you enjoy my content and you want to register your support for this channel, please do click the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and click the bell to activate notifications. All of these things really help in our endless battle to please the gods, by which I mean the YouTube algorithm. Thanks, friend. In late April and early May, we saw an opposition between Mars and Pluto, a typical signifier of tension, violence, and devastation. And unfortunately, this opposition delivered as expected, because we saw a terrorist attack in Kashmir that killed 26 civilians, mostly Indian tourists. And that attack led to a 4-day conflict between India and Pakistan, which ended on May the 10th after the US brokered a ceasefire. Those of you who watch my 2025 forecast will know that I said I thought we might see conflict in that part of the world this year. In the extended version of this video, available for World Astrology Report members, we look at the astrology of India and Pakistan and ask, why is this conflict happening now? We've also been tracing a storyline that's been unfolding during this Mars-Pluto cycle that has to do with nuclear technology and tension between the United States and Russia. The cycle began on Valentine's Day, February the 14th, 2024, when the United States accused the Russians of attempting to put a nuclear weapon in space. On April the 26th, with Mars and Pluto opposing each other, US analysts claim that a Russian satellite they believe is linked to these efforts to deploy nukes in space began spinning uncontrollably, marking a big setback for this program. Pluto can have to do with secretive or covert action. Is there more going on here than meets the eye? Almost certainly. Now, as Mars was opposing Pluto in early May, Pluto was stationing retrograde in Aquarius, signifying a time when we might expect to see revelations about the true nature of reality bubbling up to the surface from the underworld. And that's exactly what we saw. A new UFO whistleblower named Matthew Brown emerged, claiming that he had worked at the Pentagon for many years and stumbled upon evidence that the US military's knowledge of the UFO phenomenon is being covered up. You never know what's really going on, but Brown seems to me to be an honest and earnest witness, and he had some interesting things to say about the true nature of human life itself on Earth.
I think I have a good degree of confidence that the reason they're here is us. I think life, especially sentient life, is a precious thing. And I think to some, it might be a resource. I think humanity to some level is a resource for them.
I'll continue to note these kinds of development because I'm convinced they're an integral part of the Pluto and Aquarius story. But that wasn't all. Around the same time, US Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said publicly that he was going to put a stop to climate engineering which conspiracists will know as chemtrails, among other things. Kennedy claimed that certain chemicals are put in jet fuel for nefarious purposes, and that DARPA, aka the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, was responsible. The mainstream media is dismissing all this as conspiracy theory, of course, but I do wonder if it's really so far-fetched. At the end of April, UK scientists said that they were going to carry out experiments to block sunlight as part of a £50 million project to explore climate engineering. I try to avoid too much editorializing in these videos, but I have to just say it, blocking out the sun is unequivocally evil and a violation of every living being's right to enjoy the rays of the creative force of our solar system. Oh, and once again, The Simpsons predicted it all.
I call this enemy the sun. Since the beginning of time, man has yearned to destroy the sun. I will do the next best thing. Block it out.
Pluto is the planet of the underworld, as well as one that we associate with vast wealth. Think of the word plutocrat and plutocracy. And another story that emerged at the start of May brought both of these themes together. Catherine Austin Fitts was Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under the George H.W. Bush administration. She's an investment banker by trade and one of the more sober and intelligent commentators in the alternative media space. In early May, she made some shocking claims on the Tucker Carlson podcast, namely that elements within the US government have secretly misappropriated some 21 trillion US dollars in order to construct a network of some 170 deep underground bases beneath the land and even the oceans. Fitts came to these conclusions after a 2-year study, and she claims that these bases have been built to house secret government projects, as well as to provide shelter for powerful people in case of some kind of doomsday cataclysm. Whether what she says turns out to be correct or not, the timing with the direct station of the planet of the underworld and of big money is a perfect astrological synchronicity. Pluto in Aquarius is also signifying a rejigging of the geopolitical order, and we may have seen that in the form of President Trump's trip to the Middle East, during which he secured massive investment deals and gave a bold speech in which he criticized neoconservative interventionism and praised Arab states that had become prosperous without the influence of Western nation builders. Interestingly, he also snubbed Israel on that trip, although frankly, I'm not sure if that signals a real change in policy towards Israel, or it's just a way to lightly signal his current displeasure with Benjamin Netanyahu. Given that I still think conflict between Iran and Israel is on the cards this year, I suspect Trump's hand could be forced soon, sadly not in the direction of peace, but I would love to be proved wrong on this. Neptune, the planet of faith, changed sign at the end of March, and not long after that, on April the 21st, Pope Francis died. Francis had taken over as Pope in March 2013, with Neptune in the very early degrees of Pisces. His replacement, Pope Leo XIV, the first ever American Pope, took over on May the 8th, just as Neptune is making its first steps into Aries. That's an interesting synchronicity, and it's one that makes me think we might be about to witness a real change in direction for the Catholic Church. On May the 25th, Saturn, the heavyweight planet of the traditional zodiac, moved into Aries. This shift will bring pressure and weight to Aries themes, among them identity, sovereignty, and war. And almost immediately, we saw a clear shift in the war in Ukraine, a darker shift. Reports emerged that just a few days before Saturn's entry into Aries, on May the 20th, the helicopter of Russian President Vladimir Putin came under attack by Ukrainian drones in what has been described as an assassination attempt. In response, Russia launched a massive drone assault on Kiev, which killed 13 people. US President Donald Trump, who has been trying but failing to broker a ceasefire in the conflict, has accused Putin of going crazy. Saturn wants to bring limits and restrictions to war in Aries, among other things, but Saturn is also weak in this sign, and it will have to struggle to turn the tide of conflict. And finally, there's one more thing I want to note. One of the many cycles we've been tracking on this channel is the 20-year Jupiter-Saturn cycle, which governs law, governance, and technology, among other things. The current cycle began in late 2020, around the time that we saw the introduction of the COVID-19 vaccinations and all the associated bureaucratic machinery that went with them. All of that pointed towards the creation of a global ID and travel management system. At the Jupiter-Saturn square, where we are now, we're starting to see that plan really take shape, even if it's having to adapt to new realities along the way. One of those realities is the election of Donald Trump and the US is turning away from international bureaucracies like the WHO. But we saw a major development along these lines in May when Sam Altman, head of OpenAI, finally launched his World Network, which was formerly known as WorldCoin. World is a global ID system that allows people to log into online services and apps. To get a World ID, you have to scan your retina by peering into a special device called an orb. Nothing sinister about that, of course. Whether we're talking about centralized government systems for ID and digital currency, or the use of well-connected private companies, it seems to me that we're seeing the same kinds of digital system emerging across the world, from China to Europe to Africa to the US. Instead of central bank digital currencies, the US is taking a route that employs private enterprise and crypto to achieve the same goals. This approach feels more American, of course. It's more focused on free enterprise, but it seems to amount to the same thing, especially given that we know that many of the US's biggest tech companies like IBM and Facebook and Google have very close contacts with or were even started by intelligence agencies. And I expect the same thing to be the case with World. We're all being folded into a single totalizing digital control system, full speed ahead to 2030. Yay! All right, that's enough for the review this time. Before we get to the forecast for June, I have some news. You can now become a member of World Astrology Report on YouTube itself. Each of my videos has an extended version for members in which I go deeper into the material, or I cover more controversial topics that the algorithm doesn't like. You can watch those videos on my website, but I've decided to give you the option of watching them on YouTube itself. So from now on, if you sign up for membership on YouTube, you'll be able to watch my full extended videos right here without heading to another site. The extended version of this video is already available to watch right now. But bear in mind that my best value offer is still to sign up at worldastrologyreport.com. YouTube takes a big chunk of membership fees, and that is reflected in the fees here. Signing up on the website will also give you access to my monthly long-form live streams in which I go way deeper into interesting topics in astrology, like the Age of Aquarius and the Kali Yuga, and I just did a big summary of the astrology of the 2020s. The website also gives you access to my private forum where you can reach out to me with your ideas and exchange with other fans of the channel. So if you want the full World Astrology Report experience, head to the website. But if you just want to stay here on YouTube and watch my extended members-only videos ad-free, then there is now an option for you to do just that. Thanks for listening, and now back to the video. Let's just set the scene for this month a little bit. Saturn will begin the month in Aries, which it entered on May the 25th. Saturn's new presence in this sign could be setting the tone in June. So keep that in mind and review last month's forecast if you want to know what Saturn in Aries is all about. Now, on June the 6th, Venus will return to her home sign of Taurus, which she'll be transiting through until July the 4th. Venus signifies the unification of disparate elements. She represents the forces of attraction that pull people together: beauty, love, and things of value. Taurus is her fixed, nocturnal earth sign. If Taurus could be boiled down to a simple principle, it would be, I have. Taurus tends to attract and then hold on to value and comfort. If Taurus is like a field, then its ideal formula is akin to the farming calendar: plow, sow, harvest, rest, repeat. And so it strives for a kind of harmonious and steady rhythm between work, rest, and play. In the ancient world, wealth was counted in heads of cattle. Head is caput in Latin, which is where we get the words capital and capitalism from. Think also of the stock market and how when stock prices are rising, we say it's bullish. In world astrology, Taurus is associated with farming, banking, real estate, luxury, food, and the arts. Venus's move from Aries into Taurus represents a big gain in what we astrologers call essential dignity, which means how powerful a planet is according to its zodiacal position. She's moving from Aries, a martial sign in which she's considered to be an exile or detriment to her comfortable home domain. This means she'll get stronger and more empowered to do the kind of things she likes, unify people, and create harmony, beauty, ease, and pleasure. Taurus represents a particular whole sign house of your natal chart. Venus moving into Taurus is like the owner returning home from a long holiday and setting about cleaning up and getting things working smoothly again. Good news indeed for that part of your life. But there's a but. Something to bear in mind about Venus's transit through Taurus is that it will face a slightly rocky start. That's because on June the 9th, Venus will form a square with Pluto. She'll be dragged into his underworld domain, where she'll be faced with unpalatable and confronting truths related to love, beauty, value, and friendship. Pluto-Venus contacts can be times when you're forced to be uncomfortably honest in your close relationships, when unseemly things are revealed. At the same time, Venus will be powerful in her home sign, so these should be challenges you can meet relatively easily. Pluto is interested in forcing the truth out of you, and if you're willing to be brave and engage with that process, then relationships can emerge all the stronger after one of these transits. And pay attention to the art you come across at this time. It may well depict the seamier or scarier aspects of relationships and human life in general. So from around June the 6th to the 12th, Venus will be conversing with the Dark Lord. After that, let there be love. Now, Venus's improving condition isn't the only good news in June, because the other of the two traditional benefic planets, Jupiter, is also about to be empowered. On June the 9th, Jupiter will leave Gemini, which has been transiting through since May of last year. The information overload is about to end. Cancer is the homely lunar sign that signifies bounded spaces of identity, places of care, protection, and nourishment. In world astrology, Cancer relates to the home, but also the nation, tribe, and homeland. It's associated with national security, as well as food and the restaurant industry. Now, the moon is the traditional ruler of Cancer, but Jupiter also shares some of the rulership of this sign because it's where the greater benefic was traditionally said to be exalted. So it's pretty powerful here. Jupiter strives to make things grow and expand and to bring people together under the banner of things like faith and wisdom. It promotes spiritual growth and gains in wealth, which is why we all tend to love those Jupiter transits. Now, Cancer represents a particular whole sign house of your natal chart. All other things being equal, that house will now benefit from Jupiter's expansive, stabilizing, and inspirational presence in this sign. And these effects should build over the course of the year that Jupiter is in Cancer. So if you're a Libra rising, Cancer will be your 10th house, and this is good news for your career over the coming year. If you're a Capricorn rising, this should be good for relationships and business partnerships. Or if you're a Taurus rising like me, your mind, your siblings and close friends, and your community life is set to benefit. But as with Venus's entry into Taurus, Jupiter's initial ingress into Cancer might not be immediately satisfying. As soon as Jupiter enters Cancer, it immediately forms squares with Saturn and Neptune, which will both be in very early Aries. Squares are aspects of action, friction, and conflict. The Jupiter-Neptune combinations can be optimistic, but irrationally so and even delusional, while Jupiter-Saturn squares put the brakes on Jupiterian optimism with Saturnian realism. So the entry of Jupiter into Cancer could be a bit of a roller coaster. Initially, your efforts to expand in a certain area of life might be limited by fears or restrictions of some kind, but things might feel more optimistic from around the 15th to the 23rd of June or so, as Jupiter squares Neptune, although there may also be a risk of overextension due to delusion and irrational optimism. After that, Jupiter in Cancer should bring growing benefits to whatever house of your chart it lands in. But Jupiter's squares with Saturn and Neptune are also going to be important cyclical moments in Jupiter's synodic cycles with those two planets. The Jupiter-Saturn cycle concerns governance, lawmaking, and technology in world astrology. This is actually the third and final square that Jupiter and Saturn have made, so it's actually marking the culmination of this important phase of their synodic cycle. These planets conjoined back in December 2020, around the time that certain experimental medical technology was rolled out for the first time. I think the rollout of the jabs was symbolic of a broader impulse, though, that of globalist managerialism and transhumanism, essentially. Around the time of the conjunction, the WHO also stated its intention to push for a pandemic treaty. At this key phase of the cycle, the waxing square, we're seeing some interesting things happening related to those themes that were established at the cycle's start. On May the 20th, the WHO adopted its pandemic treaty after 3 years of negotiations. The US will not be adopting it, and we're currently seeing a lot of questioning of those measures taken during the pandemic, including from senior members of the American government. The Jupiter-Neptune synodic cycle is also worth paying attention to. These two planets formed a conjunction in Pisces back in April of 2022, just after the Ukraine war started. These conjunctions tend to coincide with optimism and peacemaking, and around this time, Ukraine and Russia very nearly signed a peace deal. However, none other than Boris Johnson flew to Kiev and persuaded Zelensky against agreeing to the deal, and so the war went on. We're now reaching the first major phase in the Jupiter-Neptune cycle, the first square, as with the Saturn cycle. And we're hearing more and more about the possibility of a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. Are we about to see one take shape? I think it's possible, although I wouldn't bet really heavily on it. That said, I do think that at some point, while the Saturn-Neptune conjunction is active, between now and say 2027, we are indeed likely to see the border between Russia and Ukraine fixed once again. All we can do is watch and hope. But back to Jupiter in Cancer. That's good for our Cancer houses, but what does it mean in world astrology? Well, Cancer is the sign of the nation, homeland, and national security. Jupiter moved into Cancer on July the 31st of 2001, shortly before 9/11. This should tell you that a strong Jupiter doesn't prevent bad things from happening in the world. But what it did signify in the US was a kind of national unity. People mostly put aside their differences and agreed that they needed to come together to defend the homeland. Of course, in the traumatic aftermath of that event, we also saw the shadow expressions of Jupiter in Cancer. An exalted planet can be puffed up and arrogant, as if the rules don't apply to it. Remember the words of George W. Bush, "You're either with us or against us." Remember all the witch hunts against those who didn't toe the line. Homeland security, Cancer, was everything at that time for the US. But something that's hard to accept, I think, for some astrologers, because they want the greater benefic to stand for things that they approve of, is that Jupiter is also the planet of imperialism. Imperialism brings disparate masses of people under one ruling system into one big family. Remember, Jupiter is Zeus, king of the gods. You can thrive under his protection, but he can also be a tyrant. In Cancer, Jupiter's concern is focused on those within the family, and his rule can be somewhat overbearing. Dad knows what's best for you, or at least thinks he does. In the last Jupiter in Cancer transit, which came from June the 26th, 2013 to July the 16th, 2014, Russia annexed Crimea. As far as the Russians were concerned, they were restoring their homeland and bringing members of their family, i.e. the Russian speakers of Crimea, back under their protection. During the same transit on June the 29th, 2014, ISIS leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi announced the forming of a caliphate, another kind of family, a bounded space of identity. I think the combination of Saturn and Neptune in Aries squaring Jupiter in Cancer is going to supercharge impulses towards nationalism and nativism in the coming year. For some, that'll be a relief after so much Piscean, laissez-faire, open borders kind of stuff. Things are probably now going to swing the other way, hard and fast. Expect a surge in movements and initiatives aimed at ensuring national security and belonging and excluding those deemed not to be part of the family. Jupiter in Cancer can be a healing influence. It was in that sign when the Berlin Wall fell, a moment when a nation, a kind of family long divided, was once again brought together. Amid times of fear and chaos, it can feel good to unite under the protection of the King of the Gods. And it can also be dangerous, as the 1930s showed. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. Now let's change tack a little and examine this month's full moon. On June the 11th, we'll see a full moon in the 21st degree of Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a mutable fire sign ruled by Jupiter and represented by the image of the archer. Mercury learns through study and careful observation. The two Jupiterian signs are concerned with gnosis, learning the truth through experience. Piscean experience is mystical. It involves soaking up the truth almost as if through osmosis. Sagittarius learns the truth by heading out into the world and adventuring, soaking up knowledge along the way. And then it preaches. Oh yes, it preaches. This full moon will bring a culmination or revelation of some kind in the Sagittarius whole sign house of your chart. Part of your life where you cling to optimism, even in the most threatening of circumstances. In World Astrology, Sagittarius relates to higher education, travel, foreign affairs, global trade, publishing, and religion. Any and all of these affairs are ripe to be highlighted at the time of this full moon. But there's something else interesting about this lunation. The moon will be close to square to the lunar nodes at the place astrologers call the south bending. This is when the moon is south of the ecliptic and reaching a turning point, at which point it starts heading north once again. I think moons at the bendings are a bit more powerful than your average lunations because they carry eclipse energy with them. The moon reaches this point halfway between eclipse seasons, which come every 6 months or so. And often they carry forward storylines that began at the previous eclipses and that will move forward at the next ones. I'll give you an example. On October the 3rd of 2024, we saw a solar eclipse at 10 degrees and 3 minutes of Libra. These Libra eclipses signaled major developments in the Middle East, particularly concerning Israel and Gaza. On October the 1st of 2024, Iran launched around 200 ballistic missiles at Israeli headquarters as retaliation against Israel's assassinations of the Hamas and Hezbollah leaders in late July of that year. Almost 3 months later, there was a new moon at 9 Capricorn, square to the lunar nodes, on December the 31st of 2024. Around that time, Israel launched airstrikes against Iran's Houthi allies in Yemen, targeting power plants and ports and the country's airport at Sana'a. The IDF said it had carried out the attacks because this infrastructure was supposedly being used to transfer Iranian weapons and officials into that area. So we can see how the same theme of conflict between Israel and Iran came up once again at this lunation, the lunar bending. We can expect something similar with this coming full moon in Sagittarius. It's coming almost exactly 3 months after the lunar eclipse at 23 Virgo on March the 14th of this year. This eclipse season seemed to be signaling the Trump tariffs. The lunar eclipse spans the Virgo-Pisces axis. Pisces is things that flow, like global trade and liquidity, while Virgo is technicalities, expertise, and things like that. And so I think this Sagittarius full moon could well see significant developments in international trade and business that are downstream of Trump's tariff strategy. All right, let's move on. There's something happening that could bring turbulence in the middle of June, and that turbulence may land on the doorstep of President Donald Trump. On June the 15th, Mars, the planet of conflict, action, and the pursuit of desire, will form a square with Uranus. Uranus is an unpredictable and often shocking, surprising energy, especially when it's interacting with hot, dry, fast-moving Mars. And so Mars-Uranus hard aspects, like the square, tend to signify surprising or unexpected events that happen very quickly. They can sometimes be violent. Now, the reason I'm highlighting this transit in its own special section this time is that it happens to be dialed closely into the natal chart of Donald Trump. Trump has his ascendant on the star of Regulus at 29 degrees of Leo, which is very close to where Mars will be when it forms its square to Uranus. So Trump is in the firing line of this transit. What could that look like? Well, Mars on the ascendant brings fire and heat to the native. Trump might feel provoked or angry at this time. He might find himself in conflict with someone or something. And sometimes Mars can also even bring sickness or injury. Trump might even be the agent of this energy. He might take some kind of action that surprises the world. Whatever it is, it's likely to be unexpected, fast acting, to come out of the left field. The moon of the US natal chart is also in the crosshairs of this configuration, so it looks like something that could affect the general conditions of the US or the people themselves, or at least get them riled up. Dietrich Pessin's lunar gestation cycle technique tells us that lunations 9 months apart signify events that are thematically linked. We recently saw how 2 Trump assassination plots emerged in March of this year, 9 months after the attempt on his life in Butler, Pennsylvania in July of last year. Well, in the middle of this June, we'll be reaching 9 months after the alleged second failed attempt on his life at his golf course in Palm Beach, Florida. We might well see another plot emerge in the middle of June. This energy will peak on the 15th of June, but it could express itself a few days either side of that. And interestingly enough, this energy will be dialed into Trump's entire year, because his solar return, which is when the sun returns to its natal position, happens on June the 13th. Now, this will really be Mars's last stand in Leo before it changes sign. Mars has spent months and months in Leo and Cancer this year because of its retrograde, so this represents an important shift for the war planet. From June the 17th to August the 6th, Mars will be in Mercury's mutable Earth sign of Virgo. When Mars is in Mercury signs, including Virgo, we see a clever Mars, one that's excellent at spotting and cutting away problems. I've noticed that a lot of generals have Mars in Mercury signs of Gemini and Virgo. Mars in Virgo is an excellent time to see what routines or practicalities or systems aren't working in your life and cut away the fat. And before we go, there's one last thing that I want to talk to you about: Cancer season. The summer solstice is the moment of the year at which the days are at their longest and the nights are shortest. Following this moment, light will begin to decline and darkness grows day by day, even if light is still dominant. We can associate light metaphysically with spirit and darkness with matter. And so Cancer signifies the descent of spirit into matter. It was also the ascending sign of the Thema Mundi, the traditional birth chart of the world, used as a teaching device by astrologers of the Hellenistic period. So Cancer signifies birth and motherhood and related themes such as protection, security, nourishment, and helping others to flourish. Both the luminaries and their signs have to do with identity, but where Leonine identity relates to the spirit at the very core of each human being, Cancerian identity is connected to the soul and material forms like bodies, homes, and nations. And it's often seen as a moody or emotional sign, which is due to its rule by the moon, planet of emotion. In truth, Cancers are often very tough people, at least on the outside. Think of the crab with its hard shell and soft insides. More than most, the sensitive recognize the need to defend themselves. Cancer seeks to identify itself with a corner of the earth and to make that a place in which those it loves can grow and thrive. The poet Lord Byron, a double Cancer, wrote, "There is a pleasure in the pathless woods. There is a rapture on the lonely shore. There is society where none intrudes, by the deep sea and music in its roar. I love not man the less, but nature more." What is the world but the domain of the moon? On June the 25th, we'll see a new moon in Cancer, which will be conjunct Jupiter, freshly into that sign. A new moon conjunct an exalted Jupiter looks like it will signify a lucky and expansive new beginning. That said, there is a but here. The new moon is squared by Saturn and Neptune. So there may be some sense of doubt or disillusion accompanying that new beginning. You'll want to make sure that whatever you envision here is realistic and that you're seeing things clearly. And one last thing before we go. On July the 7th, Uranus will move into the sign of Gemini, having spent the last 7 years or so in Taurus. This will be the last of the big outer planet sign changes this year. And I think it's the last piece of the puzzle that needs to get put in place before this decade gets really crazy. Big outer planet ingresses tend to make their effects known a little before the planet actually changes sign. So I'm thinking June could well be where we really start to feel the Uranian shift, especially because fast-acting planets like Mars and Uranus tend to jump the gun a little in making their effects known. In Gemini, Uranus will be far more powerful than it was in Taurus, which is a slow-moving and rather stubborn sign. And so the Promethean, fast-moving planet will almost overnight have far more power to enact its agenda, creating sudden and revolutionary shifts in technology and consciousness and disrupting sclerotic systems. The pace of events this year is about to level up, so strap in. That's it for this forecast episode. In the members version of this video, available at worldastrologyreport.com, ad-free, we now take a look at the conflict that broke out recently between India and Pakistan. This is something I warned about in my 2025 forecast, and unfortunately, it's playing out right on time. We'll look at why it's happening now and what the future might hold in this bonus section. If you enjoyed this video and you want to know more about the push towards transhumanist technocracy, I suggest you watch this video, which I consider what looks like a growing split in humanity into camps that either welcome or reject transhumanism. Thanks for watching, and see you again very soon.